Starting this morning on question 15. But it's been a couple weeks, so Paul has been shipped up to Caesarea, where Felix is the present procurator, and the Jews have come up to accuse him. They have been very adamant in doing that. There in verse 9, the governor has been given an opportunity, as would be his right, to interrogate Paul himself, but he forgoes that and nods to Paul. And so Paul basically says they have nothing that they can prove against me. And he gives them a story. We're told in verse 22 that Felix was well acquainted with the way. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, and that he adjourned the proceeding, saying that when Lysias the commander comes, I will decide your case, which is so bogus. Lysias isn't going to come. Lysias already gave him all of the information he had to give to him, and we're going to find out later, Felix is just hoping to, well, two things. He's hoping to get some favor from the Jews by not doing anything, and also hoping to get some money from Paul. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few moments. So it says, verse 24, several days later, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was a Jewess. He sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Jesus Christ. And we finished up last week talking about who Drusilla was. That's why I have this slide up there. You can see her down in the bottom right-hand corner of that chart as the great-granddaughter of Herod the Great. Her father is the one who had John the Baptist killed. Her grandfather would have been, her grandfather would have been the one who killed John the Baptist. Her father is the one who killed James the Apostle in Acts 12. And your question 14 was, why did Felix and Drusilla meet with Paul? I think, and I mentioned this, that Drusilla was probably, since she was a Jewess, or a follower of the Jewish faith, at least in the family by that time, that it would probably have been her curiosity and interest to listen to this. It would have been Felix's as well, because he knew about the way. He would probably be interested in knowing that. So question 15 then is, what did he discuss with them?
Faith in Jesus.
Pardon me?
Faith in Jesus.
Okay, so, and if they're wanting to talk to him, it would seem that they were seeking information about that. They were seeking information about faith in Jesus. So I assume if Paul's going to talk to them about that, whereas it says he listened to them as he spoke about faith in Jesus Christ, that Paul presented his normal material to them, the facts about the life and death and resurrection of Christ, that Jesus of Nazareth was the fulfillment of the promised Messiah that was going to come. And in fact, that he was the only one who could have fulfilled all of those things with regard to those prophetic parameters. Listen, there's over 300 prophecies in the Old Testament about Jesus. The odds of one person fulfilling all of those is astronomical, unless God's behind it. And of course, as Jesus being Savior and Lord, that they should then, they could and should put their trust in Jesus. And what does it say about Felix and Drusilla? What's the next thing that it says there, or in verse 24? He sent for Paul, and what did they do? Yeah, they listened to him. They listened to him. You got to give that to them. They listened to his discussion. However, and I think we all need to understand this, and you probably already do, Paul never presents the gospel in a vacuum. It's never just the sales pitch. He was before, and in front of two people who needed to make some applications of this gospel that he just presented to them. And so it goes on to tell us that Paul spoke about what? Righteousness, self-control, and judgment to come. So he's now making application with regards to the gospel that he presented to them. So how do you, this isn't on your sheets, but I'll tickle your brains and make you work a little bit this morning. What does that mean that he spoke to them about righteousness, self-control, and judgment to come? How do you interpret the message that he gave, or what form did it take? Tim?
We are all in need of that.
Okay. Okay.
We need to live righteous lives, which means self-control. And there's a reason that we need to do that. There will be a judgment to come.
Okay. John?
Those folks back then were pretty loose with their morals and practices. And when you hear hear Paul in front of one of the Roman leaders talking about self-control and the judgment to come, as well as what righteousness is, he's probably giving a message that says you need to keep yourself under control and not live like you have been.
Okay. Okay. So a strong message of repentance.
Yeah.
Yes. Debbie?
That we shouldn't eliminate people we don't think can turn into Christians, that we should be looking at anybody.
Okay.
Or just people we think fit in that box.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. The point that I hadn't thought about before is you're sitting here in front of two people who were known for their cruelty, known for their oppression, known for their total lack of righteousness. I mean, Felix wooed Drusilla away from her husband, who she left and married Felix. Listen, even keeping Paul in prison is unrighteous. He should have let him go. So you have that behind it too. John?
The second half of verse 25 kind of alludes to that as well, because Felix became frightened
Right.
and said, "Go away for the present."
Okay.
Time I'll summon you.
Okay? So, and I didn't give you this information about Felix started out as a slave and clawed his way to the top to where now he's the governor, the procurator of Syria, which includes all of this area. I'm sure that you don't get that way in the Roman set of things in an honorable way. I mean, you probably stepped on a lot of people on the way up. Both had little regard for self-control. Judgment to come would have been inevitable with them, and the penalty was going to be given to them for the sinfulness in their lives. And listen, every time I've taught this class and every time I've referred to this passage, I've looked at it that way, that this was, for Paul, hellfire and brimstone sermon. If you don't change, if you don't repent, if you don't start showing some self-control, then you're going to hell. That's the judgment to come. I don't know, maybe I'm older now and, well, there's no maybe about that, that's for sure. But what do we know about Paul with regards to their souls? What's paramount in his mind?
Their salvation.
Yeah, he wants to win them. He's not wanting to drive them to the Lord. He's not wanting to scare them straight. He's wanting to win them. And so I have toned down my view of that by righteousness he could be showing them that God could still, in Christ, declare them righteous. He could still forgive them of their sins by his grace and by his divine act of justification. By self-control, he could have been talking to them about how to overcome the temptations that are in front of them and the self-mastery that they need and the self-denial that Jesus said, if anybody's going to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And the judgment to come would have been not the inevitability of it, but how to escape it, how to avoid it. So holding out salvation to them. So that brings us to question 16 that John referred to a minute ago. Why do you think Felix was afraid? Tim?
Before that, I was just thinking that his message would be of, it seems like it'd be one of, not a respecter of persons, this is the God of all. This would definitely have not been what Felix was hearing from the.
Oh man, right. That's a good point.
So in that way, that had to have Felix's attention.
Right.
Because, hey, here's a fair-minded person. Of course, he's fair-minded because he's preaching what God
Right.
wants.
Well, and as we talked about before, Paul's no slouch. I mean, he's well educated, he's well spoken, even though he said he was not, he really was. And I really do think that if we take Paul's background and all that he's done, he's reaching out, he's hoping to save these people. When he gets over to Agrippa later, he's, I wish you were like me in every way except for these chains. I mean, he's appealing to people on behalf of Christ. He's the ambassador of Christ. He's not putting himself on the judgment seat here, which would have been me years ago. And I like Debbie's comment, you look at Drusilla and Felix, they're the epitome of sinfulness and selfishness and everything else in the whole region there. And you might look at that, they're not going to listen to me. They're not going to be interested in this. And I think Paul had a lot more confidence sometimes in the power of the gospel than we have sometimes, that it can reach people that we wouldn't think it could reach.
Yeah.
Yes?
So, 2 Corinthians 5:20, therefore we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were pleading through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. So
Right.
that's kind of that idea. And then, why was Felix afraid? 2 Corinthians 7:10, for godly sorrow produces repentance to salvation, not to be regretted.
Right.
Maybe there was some recognition that he wasn't, he recognized he wasn't following God and,
Right.
and became afraid.
Right,
So,
right. Well, I think that's true. Debbie?
I had Randy's side, and then I had my other, not negative side.
Okay.
That he might have been scared of the Jews as well, coming to get him, because he had held him in instead of letting him go
Okay.
to take care of their own situation.
Yeah. Well, and really, as far as the scenario is concerned, the Jews, I think, are long gone. This is several days later. Verse 24. So I don't think the high priest and all of them are still here. He's put them off indefinitely by saying we're going to wait for Lysias, who's never going to come. The word here in verse 25 for afraid is emphobos, E-M and then phobos, P-H-O-B-O-S, which means to enter a state of fear or alarm. I don't know that Paul necessarily said, Felix, thou art the man, when I'm talking about how sinful he was. He probably did let Felix come to his own conclusion about that, which kind of goes back to what Randy said. And I think that he did. And listen, I'll assume that Drusilla was afraid too. She's not mentioned here as being afraid. But from now on, whenever we see Paul meeting with Felix, guess who's not there? Drusilla never is listed as being with him again. She heard it once, and that was apparently enough for her. And I don't know that, Felix is going to talk about other things and talk about it more with him, but I think he's got a different agenda. And so what was Felix's response? What was his promise?
I'll call you.
I'll call you.
In a convenient season.
Yeah, I'll call you when it's convenient. When I find it convenient, I will call you. What's Felix doing there? Mark?
Each time I've ever read these passages, what I think about is it easier when a closed mind or when a closed heart. I think what happened with Felix was Paul had appealed to him intellectually, and for maybe the first time forever, his heart was touched. And I think the reason he made him go away was he wanted to go away until that feeling was gone.
Right?
You've almost won me. You don't want to be won. You need to go away for a while because
Right.
you've intellectually convinced me of something. I don't like where you're taking my
Right, right. What I have in my notes is he needed to numb his conscience. Listen, when you're pricked by the gospel, and apparently they both were here, you can either respond to it or give yourself time to harden your heart back up again. And that appears to be the case. It's a delaying action here. John?
And kind of going along with what Mark said, for every message Paul gave him, he could go out and probably find a half a dozen other contrary messages from other temples that he was probably more used to being with or hearing. So there was that
Right.
battle going on too.
Right. Yeah, I'll tell you what, I've had that happen to me so many times. People come and ask me a question, and I give them an answer. And I know they're shopping. They're shopping for someone to agree with them. And when they find that person that agrees with them, you are my savior, I've been looking for you. And it's like Paul talks about in his letter to Timothy. People out there they want their ears tickled. They don't want to hear the truth. And Felix here didn't want to hear the truth anymore. I'll call you when it's convenient for me.
They were not Thessalonians.
No, exactly. No, they weren't Bereans.
Bereans.
Yeah. They were more noble than the Thessalonians because they're searching the scriptures to see whether the things said were true or not. Now, there were apparently other meetings. Down at the end of verse 26, he sent for him frequently and talked with him, perhaps on different topics. But that kind of brings us to question 17. Why didn't Felix render a final decision in Paul's case?
He was hoping for some money.
Okay.
To keep him hostage.
So according to Luke here, there's no more public meetings with Paul and Felix and others around. There's only these private ones. Again, as we have no record Claudius ever came, the Jews were never sent for again, and his case was never decided. But Luke is pretty plain. On the one hand, as Debbie said, Felix was hoping for a bribe, which sadly was a common practice. It's illegal, but it was a common practice. The law stated that a magistrate would be exiled and all that he had would be confiscated if he was found guilty of taking a bribe. So Roman law was very strict on this. But Luke seems to think that this was a long-time practice of Felix. Listen, I think he probably got where he is now on the basis of things like that. The statement of Paul, and I think, and you're right, the text says he thought he would offer a bribe. I think when Paul is giving his defense back in verse 17, there's something that Paul said that probably caught Felix's ear. And he said, after an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem to do what? To bring gifts, alms for my people, to present offerings. Paul would have had friends that wanted to see him free. Ramsey, who we've used his timeline in our study of Mark and Acts, seems to think that Paul had come into some money. somewhere along the line. Maybe a father died or what it came into inherit. Because, and basically he comes to that conclusion because if you're paying for your own purification and the purification of several other men, and we talked about how many sacrifices that's a lot of money. That's a huge expense. And then the long appeal to Caesar that he made here, and having his own lodgings in Rome. I mean, all of these things are funds that Paul's having to provide. Let me take you over to Philippians 4, because I turn this passage often. You do too. We only usually focus on one part of that, though. In verse 12, I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. Which one of those two do we generally focus on? On the need. Paul said, I also know what it's like to have way more than I need. And I think this is one of those times. For some reason, he's got more than he needs. The word plenty means to overflow. So that may have been why Felix is meeting with him frequently, hoping, the longer I wait, the longer I hold you there, maybe you'll break and say, hey, what's it going to take to get me out of here? Tim?
Well, yeah, you can't help but wonder, Paul had planted that seed, he had a little fear, and of course, I'm sure each time Paul's still taking the opportunity to preach, and yet here's his integrity staying intact. Did that move the needle any?
Yeah. Apparently not. Paul's going to be there all the way through Felix, and listen, I can't emphasize this enough. Felix is a crook. He's rotten to the core. So rotten, as I think I'll mention later, Nero's going to remove him from being governor. So he doesn't just resign or fulfill his term. He's taken out by Nero. So question 18, how long was Paul kept in prison here? 2 years. Which under Rome, go ahead, Daniel.
Backing up to 17, isn't the reason why he never makes a decision about releasing him, or is that what you're talking about, a decision, or are you saying like a decision in terms of his spiritual condition or something?
No, I mean his decision about whether to let Paul go or not.
Because it seems like that is because of his fear of the Jews, or his
Right.
wanting to respect the
Yeah.
Jews.
Well, and again, he's gotten over the pinprick of his heart or the crack of his heart. Now he's just looking for some money. So for 2 years, and listen, under Roman law, that was the maximum amount of time of preventive custody. Why did Lysias take Paul into custody in the first place? To protect him from the Jews. They were trying to kill him. And so this is protective custody that he's in. He's not been charged. There's no crime. Lysias said he hasn't committed a crime that's worthy of imprisonment or death. So he is under protective custody, and he's now reached the maximum amount of time, which is 2 years. So he may not have gained anything monetarily, but he probably gained a little bit of support or gravitas, or whatever the word I'm looking for, from the Jews for keeping Paul out of circulation. And because there's no further trial, Paul can't appeal to Caesar. That has to be done in a formal setting, and he can't do that because there hasn't been. Felix has just been meeting with him privately. There hasn't been any more official gatherings. And so Felix was finally recalled by Caesar. And in fact, if you read Josephus, he would have been punished very severely by Nero if Felix's brother Pallas, who was a friend and had position there, if he had not intervened on behalf of Felix. And with that event, Felix and Drusilla disappear from the scriptures. Drusilla, in fact, is going to die in the eruption of Vesuvius. When Vesuvius and everybody was covered in, she and her child died. That would be back in the days of Titus. All right, any other questions on that? Yes, John?
Verse 27, with that context of how Felix was removed, reminds me of the parable Christ told about the wicked servant whose master was about to relieve him of his duties, and he went around
Yeah?
all the people
Right?
lowering what they owed the master. And here's Felix being removed from his seat of power and trying to gain favor with anybody he can, the Jews, by holding Paul longer.
No, I just think this was his modus operandi all the time.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know that Felix had any inkling of what was going on in Rome. The Jews have gone over there and they have been complaining loudly to Nero about Felix, about his character, about his cruelty and all of that, and the upheaval that he's creating. Listen, things in Jerusalem and Judea are starting to boil. And of course it's going to really begin with the whole war that's going to begin in about 66 to 68 and then finish off with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70. And so it's not in the empire's interest at all to have a governor who's inciting the Jews to unrest and riot, and so he's going to be removed. So who succeeded Felix, and what does his name mean in Latin?
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, you can.
So Drusilla, I didn't see anything extra on her in the Bible, so how do we know what happened to her? Is that-
Josephus.
Pardon?
Josephus.
Okay, just the history. Okay,
Yeah.
I was just wondering how.
Yeah. We wouldn't know her whole family background, mostly, if we didn't have all of that history. Okay, so who succeeded Felix? And what does his name mean in Latin?
Porcius Festus, and Porcius means pig, and Festus means joyous or festive. So
Okay?
I don't know if it's a happy pig or a
Okay.
festival slaughtered pig.
Okay. So a happy pig or a pig party or a pig celebration. He was succeeded by Porcius Festus, with Paul still in prison. Porcius means swine or porcine. You can see that in the word, or hog or pig. Always up to this point in time, again, with this class, I had never been able to understand why parents would look at their brand new baby and say, oh, what a cute little pig party. Let's name him Porcius Festus. That doesn't seem to make sense. So, Porcius was a name well attested to in Roman literature. When we think of pig, what do we think? What's the connotation we get from pig? Pardon me? Bacon. Glutton. Dirty, filthy, all of those kinds of things. Some sort of, it's always a derogatory reference for us. That wasn't the case with Rome. Let me give you a parallel from the other side. How did this culture look at dogs? They were horrible. They're filthy. They're in the alleys. How does our culture look at dogs? Oh yeah, they eat at the table with us, and we take them on trips with us, and so pigs in Roman culture were held in high regard. That's where we get the feminine name Portia. It's the same thing. The pig was one of three animals that was sacrificed to Mars, the god Mars, in the most sacred rites that they had. There were several other deities were understood to find pleasure in the sacrifice of hogs. And because of that, hogs were bred on an industrial scale in the Roman Empire. Which makes me remember that when Jesus was casting out the demoniac, where did they go? a large herd of swine. Why would there be a large herd of swine? Because there's money to be made in pigs. They were very well thought of. And of course, Jesus is going to allow them to go into those swine. That's in Luke 8. So a pig party, a pig celebration was actually a religious thing, a good thing, a happy thing, a highly regarded. Is that me making all that noise?
It is. I think it might be the antenna rubbing on.
I can move their antenna.
Slide it in.
It is annoying, I'll tell you that. I'm going to tighten this screw up here. Maybe that'll take care of it. Anyway, so let me just give Porcius Festus back his reputation. He didn't look like a pig when he was born. It was an honorable thing. So that takes us to chapter 25. And you know what's coming. So chapter 25, we're going to begin going back through the chapter themes. Chapter 1, the Ascension. Chapter 2, Pentecost. Chapter 3, okay, the healing the lame man, Peter's second sermon. Chapter 4, first arrest. Barnabas is introduced. Chapter 5, Ananias and Sapphira. Chapter 6, choosing of the 7. I wish I could have a number associated with it because everybody gets chapter 6. Chapter 7, Stephen's defense. Chapter 8, Philip, Samaria, any of those things. You remember any of those? Chapter 9, conversion of Saul. Chapter 10, Cornelius. Chapter 11, yeah, Peter's defense for going up there. Chapter 12, James is killed. Peter's released. Herod dies. Chapter 13, first missionary journey. Chapter 14, first missionary journey ends. And you also have Paul stoned there. Chapter 15, Jerusalem conference. Chapter 16, listen, remember I said, all you have to remember from 16, 17, 18, and 19 is the word pace, P-A-C-E. Philippi, Athens, Corinth, and Ephesus. So 16 is Philippi, Paul is in Athens in 17, 18 he's in Corinth, and 19 he's in Ephesus. If we had a word like passet, then we could have T for chapter 20, which is Paul in Troas, speaking to the Ephesian elders there. We also have, by the way, back in chapter 18, that's where the second journey begins, when Paul is in, right before he goes to Corinth. Or excuse me, that's where it ends. The second journey begins in chapter 15. So you have the Jerusalem conference and the second journey begins. When he's, after chapter 18, the second journey ends and the third journey begins. And it's just so subtle in there that Luke doesn't make a big deal about the fact that that's the thing that's happening. So we had Paul in Ephesus in 18, Paul in Troas in 20, and then chapter 21. Okay, so Paul is arrested and the third journey ends, all at the same time. Chapter 22. Paul's defense to who? To the people. Chapter 23. Okay, Paul is sent to Caesarea. Paul's defense to Felix. Chapter 24 is what we just finished. His defense to Felix, I messed up. The plot to kill Paul is 23, and he's sent to Felix. Chapter 24 is his defense to Felix. Chapter 25 is defense to Festus and Agrippa. Festus and Agrippa. And if you want to remember chapter 25 as well, that's where Paul is actually going to appeal to Caesar. Going to appeal to Caesar there. And so I think that's what I have on your chapter theme, Festus and Paul's appeal to Caesar before Agrippa. So let's look at question 1. This will probably be as far as we get. And hopefully you read the whole chapter so you can give me your impression. But when you read the whole chapter, what's your impression of Festus?
I thought he was wimpy.
You thought he was what?
Wimpy.
Wimpy?
I was just like,
Well, all of them are wimpy. Yeah. Yes, John?
The end of it kind of summed it up for me. He says, how can I send Paul to Caesar without a reason for sending him to Caesar?
Right.
He's just like, he doesn't know what he's doing.
Right. So he's like a painter who painted the floor and found himself in the corner and no way to get out. Anybody else? Tammy?
He also seems like, in some ways, he's trying to do the right thing, threading a needle of
Okay.
this weird situation, appeasing the Jews, and trying to figure what this is all about.
Okay.
But he's behind the 8 ball to begin with, and he just doesn't get
Right.
any better.
So Tammy thinks that he's trying to do what's best. And I think that he's sincere. I think he's obviously being diligent as the new procurator here. As you open up the chapter, he seems to be very, initially to be very brisk and energetic in his new office. 3 days, 3 days after arriving in the province, so he's come from Rome. 3 days from the time that he got there, where did he go? He went from Caesarea to Jerusalem. I mean, 3 days after arriving. He meets with the leaders there. He kind of has a meet and greet with them and finds out what their complaints are. And listen, he needed to do that in light of the atrocities of Felix. All of the bad things that Felix had done. They want him to send Paul down. He's firm in that, saying, no, I'm going back to Caesarea, and you can come up and charge him there. I don't know if he got wind of their duplicity or what they're planning, but he says Paul should remain in Caesarea, and they could come there. And when he gets back, he immediately takes that up. The day after he arrives back, he starts that. So seems like he wants 3 things to occur. He wants charges formerly bought by the Jews and sustained in a sense by the prosecutor. He wants the Paul, who is the accused, to be able to face his accusers, and he wants to hear the case himself. So he wants to sit and judge. So from that standpoint, I see a guy who's trying to do the right thing. Now, at the same time, I see him trying to placate the Jews because he's going to ask Paul if he'd be willing to go back to Jerusalem. I grant him he didn't just send him there. He asked that question, and Paul then, of course, is going to refuse and appeal to Caesar. And Festus is going to say, okay, to Caesar you'll go. I mean, that's a done deal. Then as John pointed out, he's got to figure out what to do, and so now he seeks advice from Herod Agrippa, but he's going to eventually send him to Rome. Excuse me. Festus, that's not me.
I don't know what it is.
Me either.
Those are off.
I'm going to just turn it off. Can you all still hear me okay? Can you turn these up? Can you still hear me on Zoom? Okay, good. Festus is going to die within 2 years of taking office. He's not going to be removed from office. He's going to die in office. But all in all, he seems to be a fair-minded, as much as he could be under the circumstances. And Josephus describes him with a much, much better character than he gave you. John, do you have your hand up?
You know, it just kind of struck me that he's very nonchalant about it when the Jews ask him. It just seems like if somebody had been living in my house for 2 years, I would want to be getting him out.
Yeah.
But it just seems like there's some sort of accepted reason
Yeah.
that Paul is there, and because Festus doesn't seem to have any idea that he should be gone.
Right. Have you ever gone into your house and set something down on a table or something and thinking, I need to get that away, and then time passes and pretty soon, what happens?
Becomes its own.
It belongs there. You get used to it being there and you don't even see it anymore. And so I kind of wonder if Paul's been around, you know, and he's got his little routine, his people coming, and Festus coming in and saying, I wonder what that guy's doing here, you know, and no idea really, and just not even aware of it anymore. But I'm agreeing with you, John, if, and you guys can all take note of this. If you come to my house and you're there for a couple of years, I'm going to be wondering why you're still here. And I won't need a bribe for you to go ahead and leave. So, John?
Could it be that Festus did want to get him out of there, but when he brought the officials up from Jerusalem and they faced Paul and they started talking to him about religious things, it looked almost like he got sandbagged.
Yeah.
Like they threw him a curve and he was handling something he didn't really know
Right.
anything about, so
Yeah.
he was confused.
Yeah, there's no comment that Festus was well acquainted with the way like Felix was. And Felix was there for 5 or 6 years, so I mean his tenure was much longer. And I think we have to kind of keep in the back of our minds here that this unrest and dissatisfaction and rebellion that's starting to foment in Israel is very real and happening, and Festus has been thrown into this pot, and he's going to try to do what he can to calm things down. And of course, he's not going to succeed at all. Let's stop there. We'll start with verse 2 because I want to hear what you think about the Jews in a little bit more detail. So, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And we'll take off with question 2 next week.